Hello, and welcome to Accessing Authors, a Windsor Public Library roundtable video series featuring our local authors. Join us as we tap into the minds and processes that build your favorite literary worlds. Chapter 1, Elly Blake.
Perfect. Hi, Ellie.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. Glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
So everyone, this is Elly Blake, the wonderful person that we've been waiting for. We've been so excited to have you with us today. Thank you so much. This is part of our series called Accessing Authors, and you're one of our first authors to access. So thank you for participating. So I'm going to have our team introduce ourselves to you. So basically, starting with Hillary.
Hi, I don't know what to say. Hi, I'm Hillary. I'm a librarian here. I work out of the Budimir branch. Yeah.
Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura. I also work at Budimir, and I'm a library service representative.
Jennifer.
Hi, Ellie. You might remember me from times past. I'm a public service librarian at Bridgeview Public Library or Central, depending on where they need me.
Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a public service librarian and I work out at the Forest Glade branch.
Okay, awesome.
Very good. So Ellie, just so you know, each of us have read your book or listened to your book or both over the last few weeks. And some of us are rereading your material. And Ellie has been with me since the very first book. Do you remember this one, Ellie?
I think I had brought the UK copies. I had more UK copies for some reason at the time to donate. And so I think I brought you a few of those. Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And I met with your wonderful group, your teams.
Yes, yes. Well, Ellie, this is the Windsor Public Library program in Windsor, Ontario, and it's called Accessing Authors. Our major goal is to bring authors in and give them some intimate time with some members of the community and some members of the staff. So today, if you're willing, I'm going to ask you to start us off with a reading from your book.
Sure. Okay. So I decided to read what is. Oh, and I marked the wrong page. That's cool. Good. Let's see. It's in chapter 2 now. Oh, there we go. But this was the original opening. So when I first started this story in February 2014, and I had sort of abandoned another book that I couldn't finish, and I had a critique partner who I was always moaning to the way we do. And I was like, I just don't know what to write or how to start something new. And I had told her I had this idea about this girl in a prison. So she was like, just write the scene with the girl in the prison. So that was what I did, and this is how it originally started. Ice cracked like the breaking of bones. I woke with a jerk, heart racing. A dark shape, something strange and inhuman, had been hovering over me. I blinked away the screen and the prison came into focus. Across the prison in a white wave, pressing over stone walls and insinuating itself into every crack and keyhole, it spilled across the floor and hardened into glittering peaks that stopped inches away, leaving me on an island of bare stone. So everything else after that sort of changed, but I wanted to read that because that's the part that basically stayed exactly as it was when I first wrote it. So it was a very short reading, but I thought that with you.
Actually, you know what? That's very good, because that will now lead us perfectly into our question and answer period. So to start us off, we'll ask Jen to start off.
I think you just alluded to it, but I was going to ask you, what did you write before Frostblood?
So before that, I have about between 6 and 8 unfinished manuscripts that I started from about 2011 on to 2014. So I obviously find it easier to start things than to finish them, and I didn't know what I was doing, and some of those manuscripts are like 80,000 words, and then I just didn't know how to end it, so I would abandon it. So, but that was, I figured, part of the learning process too. That's how I learned. I was also taking a million workshops and courses. So those were all pretty much fantasy. The first one I wrote, I did start out writing contemporary romance because my original thought was that maybe I could write like a category romance. But what I was actually reading was young adult fantasy. It was just that I thought, oh, maybe because I had this organization that I found about Romance Writers of America, I kind of thought I should be writing, just straight contemporary romance. But then once I started meeting people and seeing all the different genres that people wrote, things started to open up a little bit in my mind, and I realized maybe I should try writing something that I was actually reading at the time, which, like I said, was young adult fantasy. So the one that I wrote before Frostblood that I couldn't finish was actually a sci-fi, and I had some encouragement to finish it, but by the time I was kind of nearing the end, the sci-fi market, I was told by friends who were published, had kind of softened up and was harder to sell, and the fantasy market was picking up. So it seems weird to make decisions based on that, but like I couldn't finish that story anyway. I didn't know how to end it, so I was like, well, I'm just going to move on to this fantasy, which turned out to be a good idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what I did. It was just random things that I started, mostly pretty much fantasy. There was one that was fairy tale inspired that I've thought of going back to. But of course your writing changes over the years, and so and you learn things, and so I'd have to rewrite that one, so I kind of would have to have a vision for that. So yeah, so I haven't yet, but there's a couple that might be salvageable.
Did you go ahead?
No. Go ahead,
I
Jennifer.
say, did you set out to write a trilogy when you sat down to write Frostblood?
Yeah, I actually did, because that was a popular thing in young adult at the time.
Yes.
Trilogies were just, usually it seemed like it was a trilogy. So in my mind, I thought, yeah, I could write a trilogy. I didn't realize at the time that I was lucky that it sold as a trilogy, because usually you might sell one book and then you get another contract for another book. So I was very fortunate that my agent was able to sell it as a trilogy, so that I knew for sure that I could write all 3 books. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
It's so nice to see you.
Alex?
Okay, so my question is quite similar to the one that Jennifer asked, but have you always enjoyed writing, or did you always want to be a writer?
So probably the reason why I first thought of writing category romance was that when I was 14, my friends and I sort of discovered romance. And so at that age, my friends and I, we were kind of like, these, as people do, these don't seem that hard. We should write one, because nothing seems that hard when reading it. It seems like anyone could write this, which is not true at all. But we said that, and then, everyone sort of grew up and nobody did it, but I kept dreaming about that. I think I tried a little bit in my 20s. I wrote some poetry and I tried to write something, and I sort of didn't have the follow through, and I didn't have the confidence. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s and I was off on maternity leave with my youngest son that I was like, maybe I should actually, pursue this, or at least just see if I'm any good at it. So I started taking courses, and then it took a few years before I joined Romance Writers of America. That was 2011, and that's when I started writing seriously. So even though I had daydreamed about it, I hadn't been one of those people who, like journals or writes all the time and all that. I wasn't that at all. I had just thought about it, but I hadn't actually pursued it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
My turn. So my question is, thinking back to the beginning, what is the most important thing that you've learned as a writer from then to now?
That is really interesting. I would have answered this question differently 2 years ago. I will tell you my answer from 2 years ago. I would have said, and this is still true, this is still a good thing to remember, but I would have said, don't judge your writing by the early efforts. You cannot know if you're talented based on the first thing you write. Do not look at it and say, this is terrible, I can't write. Because there's so much to learn, but you can learn it. It's like anything else, right? Like even drawing, even if you're not, I'm saying this because I've taken drawing courses and I'm not talented with drawing, but you improve and you learn, and it depends on your passion and your dedication too, right? So don't judge yourself by your early efforts and then give up thinking that you don't have what it takes, because you don't know what your potential is, right? So, and even a first draft, like even someone experienced, a lot of people who've written for years and who are published will tell you how terrible a first draft is. So, just don't judge a first draft kind of thing. Now that I've had the last 2 years where I've struggled since my trilogy has finished, I would say to really protect your creativity. I think that's one thing that I didn't do enough, and that I have learned, and I am still learning the hard way that I need to do. It's, about respecting the your unconscious, which is the part of you that creates those things, not being so hard on yourself, because if you are, kind of cursed or blessed, but probably cursed to be a perfectionist type, or where you're really critical of yourself, that can sort of, suddenly that muse or that creative side, it just starts to quiet down, and then it just stops talking to you, which is very scary when suddenly this is, you get to the point where, yay, this is my job, and then you can't do it anymore. So this, sorry if this is TMI, but that's my current struggle, is trying to be more nurturing of my creativity. Sometimes it even might mean saying no to opportunities that you kind of know in your gut aren't right for you, or people, maybe an agent or editor who wants you to write something that doesn't feel right, like to totally change your story into something you didn't mean it to be, and you think, oh, I should do this to sell. But if it doesn't feel right, maybe you have to protect that inner voice. So that's my current learning process, is that lesson right there.
I love that.
Ongoing.
I'm actually really curious about your character development of Ruby, and how Ruby starts off kind of meek and not believing in herself, and then turns into a fairly confident woman at the end, I thought. How did you write her? And did you write her alongside of your own sort of growth and development as a writer?
Oh, that's really interesting. Probably. Yeah, I'm sure there's a huge parallel there. I think there's always a parallel if you, I think it's the plot whisperer. There's some writing teacher who's written books who has a parallel between, or shows a parallel between the act of writing a book and the hero's journey that your character goes on. The whole, midpoint reversal where suddenly something changes or whatever. There's the dark night of the soul where you think nothing, you can't do it. And it's never going to be able to accomplish it, etc. So I think there's probably a parallel, since you're writing that hero's journey for your character, that you're kind of going through it yourself. You get that that slump in the middle a lot of times. You have a hard time figuring out how to go forward. And each person has a different area of the book usually where they struggle the most. Obviously mine is endings. But so Ruby, so I was still learning. Obviously I'm still learning and always will be, but for character development is one of those things that I still want to get better at. So with Ruby, I was just thinking about this today because I got an email from my friend's daughter, who is a teenager who has been read my books from the beginning and has been incredibly supportive. She was telling me how she loves how flawed Ruby is. And I remember seeing reviews early on when I was still looking at reviews, which I shouldn't do, but anyway, it's just not good for me mentally. But of course, at the beginning, you kind of always look, and some people were mad about how, she does stupid things, or she does, she doesn't always make the best choices, or she's really mouthy. And I'm sure, there are things that are fun to write that might be irritating to a reader. So for me, the fact that she's so emotional is from me. I have trouble, I get overwhelmed by my own emotions. That is very much me, and I could just tap into that. The side of her where she's, mouthing off is kind of what I wish I could do. I wish I could and could confront people more easily. And so that was a bit of vicarious, living. So her character probably developed, more over the series as I discovered who she was. And I think her main journey is self-acceptance, right? Because feels like there's something wrong with her at first. She's dangerous. She she's failed her mother. And then she feels like she has this power she can never master. And then she doesn't know where she belongs. In the second book, it's kind of like, where do I even belong? And I think for me, I had to kind of write all those things to understand her better. And then ultimately the goal is, self-acceptance and kind of figuring out where you fit in the world and just accepting that. So that's probably kind of what I want to learn, right? So that's why I took her through that. Yeah.
No, I thought as a young adult novel, her character is perfect because she starts off a little tentative and frightened, as you said, and then she gains this confidence and this understanding about herself. And that's perfect for the young adult community. So I thought you were really, really tapped into the young female emotions there. I thought that was really important because when young women read this book, or even young men, to understand that they're in that same place where they maybe don't feel so confident, it's so great to read that in a book. It's very empowering to them.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, my question, you really answered it already. I'd asked if there was anybody whose alter ego you'd written into the book. Because, we always have people who want to be something else. So you have the Spider-Man character created because you have a superhero that someone wants to be. But one of the things I do want to ask instead is, did you realize that your book has really helped a lot of the young people I've worked with address issues like bullying and trying to stay true to yourself? And so even though you have the vulnerable side, the fact that she's very strong when she really does decide, sometimes you have to go through that weak moment in order to figure out where your strengths really lie and what you want to stand up for. Did you have any teenagers or anyone who influenced you in this process as you were writing this character, or any of the characters, for example?
I have had messages, really nice messages from some teenagers. While I was writing the trilogy, so the crazy part about this trilogy is that the books were supposed to come out 9 months apart. That was the publishing schedule, the idea was great. My agent and I thought it was a great idea because then, you're building momentum for the series. The readers don't have to wait so long. But writing a fantasy, which is over 100,000 words usually, and it's in less than a year is really challenging. And I actually I couldn't do it. So I was kind of underwater with my schedule for the whole trilogy. So while I was writing, I'm not sure I even kind of saw the outside world, like engaged with all the messages. I tried, but I think I was just always so behind on everything that I don't know that I had a specific story that influenced me. I've had stories like messages that have moved me greatly. But during the writing part, man, it's such a blur now. I swear. Get through, and then I just collapsed. So, yeah. But the messages just mean so much to me. Like I get overwhelmed with how sweet people are. And Janet, you are one of those people who sent me nice messages. So I have to say thank you so much, because nothing makes you feel like writing more than people saying good things about the words you've already written. So that's the biggest thing. Biggest encouragement for sure.
Thank you. Hillary?
Yeah, okay, so changing a little bit, I'm going into what you're reading. So I was wondering what kind of upcoming YA you're most excited to read in the end of the year and next year.
Oh, that's a good question. I have been a little bit out of it with the upcoming. I'm reading a lot of my friends' books, so I'm always excited. Mara Rutherford, who wrote Crown of Coral and Pearl, she is so I read her sequel to that already before it was published, because that's how you can be lucky when you're a critique partner and you get to read things early. That's a great series, and now I had read her next book that also sold. I think she announced that But then there's another one, which I can't say anything about, but I'm liking that one and kind of waiting for it. And then another friend, I'm slugging books, Nikki Paupreto, who wrote Crown of Feathers, which is about phoenix riders. Her third book is coming out, and I haven't read that yet. Her books are very big, so I'm a little bit behind, but I'm excited for her third book, and she's finishing out that trilogy. I'm actually reading a romance right now. It's called Destiny's Captive by Beverly Jenkins, because I read historical romance for my fun read. Like, I find reading young adult fantasy is a little more complicated for me now that I write it, because I end up comparing myself a lot. And then, I can't always enjoy it, because if it's great, I feel like, oh, why can't I write like this?
Yeah.
I'm critical of things if I see things that I would, whatever, like pacing is slow for my preference or whatever. I don't know. Sometimes you can be more critical, and sometimes you can be more hard on yourself, reading your own genre. I also really enjoyed Rena Barron's Kingdom of Souls. I don't know if you're aware of that one. I'm not sure if it's gotten as much buzz as it deserves, and that one's really neat. It's a Nigerian-based fantasy in a very rich world, and I was lucky to read that a little bit early too. So those are some, and like I said, I'm reading Beverly Jenkins. I read a lot of historical romance to unwind and relax and daydream and all that stuff. So that's kind of my go-to genre. And also reading some nonfiction, just, because of the Black Lives Matter movement. I had some books that I'd already bought, but I hadn't read yet, and that kind of inspired me to read some of those. So I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Am I saying that right? And I just read We Speak for Ourselves by D. Watkins, and that was really good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so building off of what Hillary asked, in terms of your reading preferences, you've sort of touched on this already, but do you have any particular authors that you find yourself frequently turning to when you're looking for something to read?
I like paranormal romance for kind of a mixture of relaxation and inspiration, because it's different enough from young adult fantasy that maybe I'm not comparing it directly as much, but it also has the magic element. So in the adult paranormal romance, Kresley Cole is one of my favorites, the Immortals After Dark series. But like I said, that's adult, so it's not a YA recommendation. What are some go-to? I'm not a huge rereader. I did start rereading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, a comfort read during, with quarantine and all this stuff going on. I actually ended up watching a bunch of adaptations as well for books, just comfort stuff, when you go back to those favorites and all that. But yeah,
Thank you.
It varies.
So my question is, what book do you think has been the most life-changing for you? Whether it's something you read as a kid or something you read as a teen or now?
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's a few. I don't know that I can name one. So when I was 9, I read the Narnia Chronicles of Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my introduction to fantasy. If I hadn't read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and those books, I don't know that I would write fantasy. And then, like I said, I started reading romance in my early teens. And then also in my teens, I read Jane Austen, her books. Some of them, I didn't read all of them yet. I kind of started saving them once I realized how much I loved her. And I read Charlotte Bronte. And those ones, I think, just really influenced me because, they were a female main character, and of course written by women. And another one in that vein that I think that was, looking back, was really important is The Hero and the Crown by Robin Mckinley. I think that was the first fantasy. I don't know if young adult was the term yet back then, but it would be YA fantasy now. And written by a woman, and with a female heroine who, had a power and became very strong and went on that journey, and I would say that structure must have kind of stayed in and then influenced maybe my reading once young adult became popular. But that was the first one like that I had read. So those ones were really, really important to me. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting something, but I think those are the ones from when I was younger that I would name.
Okay, I have the next question. So you mentioned this a little bit in one of the earlier questions you answered, but I read in an interview that you try to stay away from the comments online about your books. And is this something that you still do? And how do you manage, if you could just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my friend actually was one of the ones I was telling you that is also a writer that I mentioned. She was saying how she got published a little bit after me, but it was kind of validating when she said, the reviews kind of mess with you. They, not just the bad ones, but the good ones too. And when she said that, I was like, yeah, there's something, I don't know why. I think it's because it's easier to write when you think, you're writing for other people, but you can't get too caught up in what everyone wants, because then you can't write at all. It's just paralyzing. So you kind of have to write, like for me, I'm writing for my 18-year-old self when I'm writing YA. So when you start realizing everyone's preferences and seeing things through their eyes, and some of the reviews, are very negative, and like, I didn't realize, I think, until I started reading my reviews. I made the mistake of going on Goodreads one day, and some of them are very long, and like they're kind of performance meant to be funny. And these people have hundreds of followers, and I mean, I can admire that. It was just something that I personally should have read. And she was, really hard on the book and making fun of it, and she was really funny, and I could see why she had a lot of followers, but it messed me up because I just, to see myself, my writing through those eyes, it doesn't help me. It doesn't help me write. Yeah, so I think some people think that like writers are just sort of dying to get those critiques all the time, but the truth is, we're all really fragile, and like deep down, I mean, maybe there's big egos everywhere, but like I think we're all pretty insecure about the words don't always come easily to most people, and if you start second guessing everything because this person hates this and this person hates this, then suddenly you don't have anything to write. So that's why I stopped looking at reviews, which I was told not to do in the first place, but I sort of ignored that advice and then realized I should have listened. The hard part is when people tag you on Instagram. Most people don't do this now because various authors have asked not to be tagged in negative reviews, and most people seem to respect that. But sometimes I will get tagged with a negative review, and it's a really beautiful picture because of Bookstagram. They take the book and they flowers around it or whatever and make it really gorgeous, and they still do that if it's a negative review. And I sometimes with the foreign editions where it's in a foreign language and there's this gorgeous picture and they translate and they hated the book. It's like, other than that, though, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of not looking at reviews anymore.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. Because I find even as a reader, especially Goodreads, there's so much on there, and it's opinion based. Just because you didn't personally like it doesn't mean it's a bad book. So even as a reader, I try to stay away because that will affect how someone reads a book to begin with. So thank you.
That's true. Even as a reader, sometimes you don't always want to see the reviews, right? Because you might be affected. You just want to find it for yourself if you like it or not.
Definitely, yeah.
Complicated.
And to Jennifer.
Oh, okay. I'm dying to know if you're writing right now, but I don't know if I'm supposed to ask that yet. I will ask you though.
Okay, you can.
How did making the New York Times affect your life? That must have been a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, it was. So I'll be honest, you can't hit, I shouldn't say can't. It's very unlikely to hit the New York Times unless you get huge publisher support. So that is, and I was very lucky. They just really supported the book, good marketing, etc. Because you can write a great book, but if no one hears about it, it's hard to sell books, right? So I was lucky.
Yeah.
So never forget the day that I found out I was doing a pot of spaghetti and the phone rang, and that was my editor. So I asked my son to watch the spaghetti while I talked to her because she doesn't usually call, so I knew something was different. So 5 or 6 weeks after the book came out, which is really unusual because normally if a book's going to hit the list, that's normally the highest sales. So I was.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Ellie. I'm not sure.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm having some trouble.
Trouble this whole time?
No,
just this last question.
Oh, okay. Is it better now that I'm closer?
Yeah, much better now. Yeah, good.
Okay. So I was not expecting it. And when she told me that the book hit the New York Times, I started crying. And then I heard in the background, it was the entire team at Little Brown, like the whole editorial staff. It was a like a conference call thing or whatever. It was a speakerphone, so they all heard me crying, and which was fine. They all were happy, but I didn't know it was. I thought it was just my editor, and I'm like, crying.
Awesome.
But
did the spaghetti boil over?
My teenage son did a good job of watching.
Okay, good.
So that was good, but yeah.
Excellent.
Obviously, it's just it's the Holy Grail, right? Like it's the thing we'll always hope for, and it was very unexpected. And I can go off on so many tangents. I don't know what's interesting or not, but I met an author at a conference, and he kind of he didn't seem to think that I thought I was being overly humble about the New York Times, but it's like I don't know. It's not just you. It's the publisher has to release it.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I guess is you don't always know until you're. And
I would think it also puts pressure on you too. You feel pressured, but it's great. It's exciting, but it also puts pressure on you to keep performing, right? That would be the part that would stress me out, I think.
Yeah, probably unconsciously. I think if I were. Probably it would be worse if I were less of a hermit and I interacted with more people and felt that pressure from other people. But, I live in a small town and, see people all the time that are in the writing world. So it almost ends up feeling like a dream, like it just happened, but it's at this other part of you. What you do get, though, once you have that, is you get a lot of requests for blurbs, which like the cover quote for other people, and which is really cool. But it actually also can get overwhelming. So then you have to start saying no, which feels bad.
Because you have to read the books, right? And I know it.
Pardon me, Janet, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say you have to read the books in order, if ethically, so that takes up a lot of your time away from your writing process. And
And I tried to say yes to as many as I could. So that's what, I ended up reading a lot of books, which were great. But then at some point, then you just can't keep reading more. Like you have to start saying no, and then you feel guilty. It's reality, right? So, and honored, obviously. Like I can't say anything. That was just an amazing thing that happened to me, and I'm just incredibly grateful. So
yes, congrats.
So you touched a little bit on how you switched from writing adult and then going into YA. That was my question, but you've already touched on it. So I'm curious, do you think you'd ever switch back into writing adult again, particularly romance, since you seem to love it so much?
Yes, I'd like to. I've started a couple little things, and it's what I'm worried about right now is that my voice is so honed to YA that it's going to come out YA because that's what happened. So I'd have to find an adult voice, and so that'll be something that I'll have to figure out. But yeah, I would like to try that because I do love romance so much. So I'd like to try that too, but it's always a learning curve too, especially genres. So we'll have to see. Voice-wise, it is easier to write what I've already written. because that's familiar. So we'll see.
Thank you. And back to Alex.
Okay, so moving into talking a little bit about your writing process a little bit, just curious to know, how do you typically start a day of writing? Like, do you have any specific steps you have to take or something?
So when I was writing the other books, like everything previous to 2017, I was working at the library, not the Windsor Library, but as you guys probably know already, and Jennifer knows. And so I was toggling between like a day, the shifts that I was working at the library. So what I usually did, I found it easier to write on my days off because I found it hard to get into writing mode after working a shift. It's two different brains, especially with fantasy, I think, because your mind has to be in a totally different world that you're imagining and you're building on the page. And I had a hard time like coming home, making supper, and then switching my brain on to write. Just for me anyway. I know some people can do that more easily. I have a friend who writes when she takes her kids to soccer, when they're at violin lessons, like anything. She just writes everywhere. But I find it really hard to do that. So I would write on my days off. I have a lot of anxiety, and particularly around writing, unfortunately. So it takes me a really long time to get my mind into it. And sometimes I can't, because if the anxiety is too high, it just blanks your mind. And for me anyway, that's how bad like my anxiety is. And if my mind is blank, I have no words. I can't write. So that's been my struggle lately. So I don't even have a routine anymore. I did when I wrote the trilogy. I had, at least I tried, like I would have a certain soundtrack that I'd put on, usually the same one. And so that it would wear that, as soon as that music is on, oh, that's writing music. Some people search for their, music based on their mood every day. I don't know how they do that, because it's, to me, like the sameness of it to cue my mind that it's time to write. So I put my headphones on. Yeah, sometimes peppermint tea I found to be like one of those things that was calming and would help me. Sometimes I light a vanilla candle. Sometimes that helps because, again, with the scent being like a cue to your brain that, oh, it's time to write, something that you don't do otherwise. So it does help if you have like a little routine. Some people need something on their desk that they can look at. I don't know if anyone here has read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's about writing. It's a great book for any writer. And she talks about, she has a little picture frame, like 2-inch picture frame on her desk. And what does it say? I forget the exact quote, but it's basically write what you see, like in this tiny frame. So that, because the task of writing a book is just so big and overwhelming. And if you think about all the steps ahead of you, you just get totally overwhelmed. So if you just think about like, what can I see in this scene? What's this little tiny bit that I can see, and you just describe it, then you can start sometimes. That's another little tip. I actually did buy a little picture frame so that I can put that. Idea. Anything that breaks it down and makes it a little easier can help. It changes for me. I felt a little better. I'm trying to remember the author. I was watching an author speaking, and he was saying his method changes. Sometimes he could write in taxis, so he was taking Ubers all over the place. So he found for a while he could write on planes. This is a thriller author, and you'd know who it is. I just can't think of his name. So he'd write on planes. And he said it's basically like you ride the horse until it dies, and then you find another horse. Yeah. And that's where I am. Is like I'm trying to find the thing that works for me now, because I sort of exhausted all my other methods for writing the trilogy. Yeah, that was a long answer. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay, I think now Hillary.
Yeah, so building off of that question, can you explain a bit of your process, how it is creating a fantasy world? Like, where do you get your inspirations for character names or places? Like, how do you start creating that world?
For Frostblood, I looked at weather terms. This was before I even knew what my magic system was going to be, and I was just like, what's a cool thing? So Arcus is actually a type of storm system. I guess a certain cloud type. gosh, I'm forgetting. I used to know this. And so a lot of those are, of course, Latin inspired. And so that's probably why a lot of the names ended up being, some of them anyway, were Latin inspired. Some names, I stole a name from a hairdresser for one of the characters. I don't know whether I should tell that story. My story's okay. I finally got the courage after years last year to tell her, this hairdresser, she's not my regular hairdresser, and I told her that I used her name in a book, and I was so embarrassed, but I don't know, it's like you don't know how people are going to react. It was really
Was
nice.
she flattered?
Yeah, she was.
Okay.
And which name was that? I'm curious, Ellie.
Dorina.
Which name was it?
Dorina.
Corina. Oh, good. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that name was so taken. And some names are made up. Morella was just a made up name. Yeah, I don't know. I unfortunately don't have a really, I don't have the kind of brain where I build the world in detail before I write. It's like what name feels right as I'm writing. If I can't figure it out, I go to behindthename.com and I look for names and whatever thing I think might feel right. Like I used a lot of Old Norse names for the frostbuds, stuff like that.
Okay.
Well, one of the things I like, as I told you in my email, is I got submerged in your story again, and I'm really impressed by how you created a whole world. Do you have a map, or you're writing a trilogy, so how do you maintain the memory of where things are and where things are? I know, did you have a map at all or anything to guide you as you wrote the work, or did you just keep going back to your notes?
And that would have been great. So I didn't have a map. In fact, there was a mistake in the first book where something was west and it should have been east. Like it made no sense, and I think it ended up changing for the other editions. But it was simply because I didn't have a map. There is a map in the book that's behind you, the UK edition. They did a map, and I could tell you my secret about that. So they wanted to do a map, which I was absolutely thrilled about, but I had to do a rough map so that the artist would have something to go off. But I didn't have any experience making maps, and I'm not a highly visual person. I'm not good at spatial stuff, so I was totally intimidated. So I was looking at YouTube, and I found there's this Macaroni Map Method. So that's where you take dry macaroni and you pour it on the page, and then you move it around, and you can create sort of realistic continents, like with the shoreline, with the jagged shoreline and stuff. So if you look at that map in the UK edition, now that you know that, you can clearly see that it was made with macaroni.
That's great.
Still, my shoreline and stuff, and can you see it?
I don't know if you guys can see it. Can you guys see it?
I can't.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so there's a macaroni edition. I asked this question because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and he is the grandfather. Both he and C.S. Lewis are the grandfather. You know that they had a group together, right? You know that they were friends and they had a writing group, and there were a few other authors.
I knew they were. I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a group apparently that they had, and they would meet, and they inspired and they helped each other through the two trilogies. So C.S. Lewis and Tolkien helped. Yeah.
I read Lord of the Rings because after I read Narnia, then I read Lloyd Alexander, and then I read all of the Tolkien. I started with The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's it. I wondered if you created a map. I just wanted to know. That's good to know. That's good to know.
So kind of building off of that as well, my question is, what places or people, whether that's real or fictional, inspired your writing or the characters or the places in your books?
I think, okay, so for Tempesia, when I was looking at inspiration pictures, and I think this is on my Pinterest board for that book, there's a lot of pictures of the ice hotels in Sweden.
Mm.
So that was my inspiration.
Cool.
I mean, living in Canada, right, we have snow and winter, so any description of frost or ice is obviously just, you know, things observed here. And then, I don't know, there wasn't anything really specific, I think, for Sudesia, aside from, you know, Southern Europe and like island countries, maybe a little bit of a mixture of different things. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. That's really bad. And then Nightblood, the third book, is I was using Iceland as inspiration for that, with, you know, a place with ice and volcanoes. So yeah, that was my go-to research for that one.
Nice. So this is again on writing process. How do you keep your inspiration alive and your creative juices flowing? I know you kind of touched on that earlier, but
like I said, I'm kind of relearning the whole process, because it was kind of like, well, there's the analogy is you know, you can't wring out a dry sponge. Like the creativity, like you have to refill the well. You have to like have something to wring out. And I think I just wrung out like everything in my unconscious, and I was just kind of spent. So I'm relearning this whole process now. So I think everyone needs breaks. Everyone needs breaks, and maybe more than you think you should have. You know, like maybe we don't always allow ourselves. This is probably true in like any job, right? We probably don't have enough downtime compared to what we need to feel good. But yeah, for writing, I think maybe two things that I'm learning now is, one, if I can try to write, like strike while the iron is hot, like kind of like get it out while the inspiration is fresh, and not nitpick myself so much that I'm trying to perfect it as I'm writing. Like just get the ideas out, get that first draft. I think that is a good thing, because that's what I used to do. And then I started getting really hard on myself. But the first draft is supposed to be terrible. So if you can get out that first terrible draft, then you have something to mold, right? You're just making the clay, and then later on you can mold it. And then the other thing that I think is really important that I'm still learning is not to let other people see it. Not too early. Don't let other people's opinions weigh in when your mind hasn't really finished forming what it is. Of course, it's not going to be well executed enough at first for other people to understand what you're trying to do. And it can really change. Like if then you start trying to write what they think it is or what they want it to be, it's so easy to do that. So I think those are two things I'm still learning. It's like, just keep it to yourself for longer and try to get it out without being so critical. Those are what I'm going to try. I'm going to see if it works.
thank you.
Well, that ends our conversation with the group, Ellie. So what I'm going to do now is we're hoping to have a few other authors, and I'm going to ask you a series of 7 questions very quickly. And it's kind of based upon a show I saw in my youth called Inside the Actor Studio. So the first 2 questions are from that series, and just 7, not 10. So here we go. Ellie, what's your favorite word?
My favorite word, the first one that popped into my head was inscrutable. That's random. I don't know if I have a favorite word.
Oh, that's good. Okay, what's your least favorite word?
Least favorite word, irregardless.
I like it. Okay, which of your characters would you like to live out the rest of that character's life?
Like, which character would I like to be?
No, yeah, if your characters that you've created,
okay,
you could step into their shoes and live out the rest of their life, which character would you choose from the series?
I would have to be Ruby. I don't know if that's, but yeah.
Good. Which place that you created would you least like to live in?
Very interesting. Probably the Isle of Night in Nightblood. That seemed like kind of a grim place.
Of all your senses, which one would you like to give up first?
That's a really hard question.
Mm-hmm.
guess I'd say smell, just because sometimes there's unpleasant smells, so at least you don't have to deal with those anymore.
I like that. Okay, this one is just as hard. Which color would you remove from the world?
Color.
Yes.
Tough. It seems like one of the answers would be gray because people don't like gray, but I love gray, so that's not a good answer. I don't know, maybe a certain shade of puce.
Okay. And if you could talk to your 10-year-old self, Ruby, I just called you Ruby, so there you go. If you could talk to your 10-year-old self, what would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Oh, I'd say there's nothing wrong with you. You're okay, just like you are.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you very, very much, Ellie. This has been a joy for my colleagues. Pipe up and tell us what you thought. But I really think, as you know, that you're wonderful. I think you're very creative. I'm very grateful to you for this series. It has allowed me to just escape at a time, again, that I needed to escape. And it was wonderful. So I can't thank you enough. I don't know if you have something else you'd like to close with in a reading, or if you'd like to read something. You don't have to, but it's your choice.
That's right. I was supposed to read something new, right? I can do that. I have my computer open if you want me to, but
of course we do.
Yes, we do.
We
Yes.
do.
I'll read the paragraph of the one that I just started a few days ago.
Thank you, Ellie.
Which may or may not turn into a story, because now I've confessed that I abandoned things, so now you know that, but okay. The forest didn't keep secrets. It always gossiped when humans were near. The chestnuts and beeches and oaks spent most days drowsing in their secret world of cool quiet, untouched by weather or the change of seasons. But enter a human, and it was all rustling and creaking and the chirping of offended birds. Okay, that's the first paragraph.
That's really, thank you. My friends in Nova Scotia call this time that we're going through, Ellie, the Great Pause. Okay. And it's a time of change. It's a time of renewal, but it's also a time of creativity and a time to sort of figure out what we really value the most. And I value good books, and I really, really am appreciative. I'll have my colleagues say whatever they want to say, but I would like to say thank you again, Ellie, for agreeing to do this and for writing your books. And I will always look forward to reading anything that you write. You have a wonderful way with words. Thank you.
I think you're so wonderful. Thank you for all the kind words you've given me. So I just appreciate you inviting me here and everything that you've done for me as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you.
It's so nice meeting you guys.
Nice to meet you.
Meet
Bye.
you.
Take care.
You too.
Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more episodes of Accessing Authors by subscribing to our Facebook and YouTube channel.